Hey everybody, it's Eric here alongside Rod. We're here to talk about wish you a happy new year and talk about Ohio State as Michigan State resumes Big Ten play and heads back into Columbus on Friday afternoon or evening. Uh, well, one big thanks to Adam Rock and who sent a one-time gift in honor of his Bruce at the Brez. So hey Bruce, thanks Adam. If you want to help support the show, please head on over to our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. There you can find the links to become a recurring supporter or through one-time gifts. Okay, Rod, let's talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes, who are kind of an interesting team this year, at least as the way their season's gone. They're 9-4 for the season, 1-1 in the Big Ten. They had a nice win at home, and they just got destroyed by Maryland on the road. They're 28th overall in Ken Palm, so very good. They're under their first year, as we had talked quite a bit before, under Jake Diebler, who is the former interim assistant coach. He then got the job, which kind of surprised us. It replaced Chris Holtman, who ended up at DePaul. And the team has been up and down. So they had really good wins to open the season against Texas, but then lost a couple games later by double digits to Texas A&M. Then they lost 3 or 4, including, like I mentioned, the game against Maryland, but they also got destroyed by Auburn, although most teams are getting destroyed by Auburn, so maybe that's not that big a sin. But they've recovered, and they've won the last 3 games by almost 21 points, including one game against Kentucky on a neutral floor where they beat them by 20. So I don't know who's Ohio State. I think most of these
Well,
teams, I feel like it's going to take a couple weeks to figure out who's who.
it's true of a lot of teams, but Ohio State more than most, I think, because it's been roller coaster results. They've had real roster turnover issues and weird ones. Not
Yeah,
not guys, not just guys getting hurt. It's been their big man Aaron Bradshaw was out for a while. The whole thing looked. There were rumors early on that it might be related to a gambling probe. That turned out to not be the case. It appears to be around a criminal legal issue, but he has come back, which and has played in the last few games. In the meantime, one of their other starters, Michi Johnson, a guard who started his career at Ohio State, transferred to South Carolina, was very successful there, and then transferred back this year. A couple of weeks ago, he left the team for personal reasons, didn't go into any more detail than that. He has not returned, and there doesn't seem to be any imminent return date set. So they've had some weird stuff going on, which I think is at least partially responsible for the up and down play. But
sure.
that win over Texas, I watched that game, their opener, neutral court, very impressive. They looked very good, and I was reasonably high on Ohio State coming into the regular season, so it
Hmm.
wasn't a surprise. Then you go on the road, you get whipped by Texas A&M, but it's a road game, so okay. But that 3 game stretch where they lost at home by 1 in overtime to Pitt, that was
Yeah.
not good. Take that loss on your home court. And then you get ripped by Maryland. And then, you said, well, everybody's getting beaten by Auburn. That's true. Not everybody's losing to Auburn by about 40 points. And
Yeah.
that's what it was. That was the point that I think a lot of people, myself included, were starting to wonder, boy, did they make a mistake with this hiring decision? Are they already, because the pattern with Ohio State in their last few years under Holtman was they got off to terrible starts
Yeah.
and then would rally at the end of the season. Not enough the last couple of years to make the tournament, but at least be playing much better basketball. But this was a whole other level, and then they recover. They're on a 3 game win streak now. In the middle of that 3 game win streak, as you mentioned, they beat the hell out of Kentucky,
Yeah.
beat them by 20 points. And look, I've seen Kentucky play several times this year. I think that team has overachieved a little bit. I do not believe they are quite as good as their record indicates. But the fact of the matter is, they've beaten Duke and they beat Gonzaga.
Yeah.
So they're real, and for Ohio State to handle them the way that they did, even if they're not, maybe they're only a top 15 team rather than a top 5 team. That's still really impressive. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't know. You look at as we're going to go through the numbers here. Ohio State's profile as a team is pretty good. It actually looks a little better than you would expect from a team with a 9-4 record. But then again, as we've just been mentioning, they've played a tough schedule thus
Yeah.
far. Neutral court game against Texas is a good one. Neutral court win over Kentucky. That's 2 neutral court wins. Very good. Road loss to Texas A&M. Road loss to Maryland. I think it was a neutral court loss to Auburn.
Yeah.
And then a home court win against Rutgers. But that's several games they've played against high majors, and the majority of those are teams that are pretty good. So, 9-4 when you consider the schedule isn't an abject disaster. I think that this little run they've been on, especially as I say, the win over Kentucky, has put a much better spin on things than they had, say, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, I feel like in the past, and maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I think I am, is that they've played a pretty soft non-conference schedule usually, at
Yeah,
least under
not
Holtman.
this tough.
Not
I
like
would
this.
agree
And
with that.
so,
Yeah.
they're 9-4. Those years you're like, this is kind of
Right.
a little iffy. But yeah, this year they're definitely
But
better.
it
And yet,
wasn't, what was happening. It wasn't just that they were losing. It's that, they're losing a game at home against
yeah,
Pitt's okay, but that's not a great team.
right.
And then to just get smoked, to not be competitive at all against Maryland or Auburn, that really started to, for me, I know, and I think for a lot of people, that the alarm bells started to go off after that. She's like, boy, this team really just does not look like, they can. You look at Michigan State's start last year that we all lamented. MSU was losing those games, but they weren't getting blown out.
No, no.
This was different. This was, you aren't even in the game. And given the recent past with some of these guys being part of that, I
Right.
think there was legitimate reason to wonder. But they say, in basketball, you're basically one game away from turning the way you feel about your team at this time of year, at least,
Yes.
completely around. We saw it with Michigan State last year after they went and ripped up Baylor. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, it's like, okay, maybe they finally figured it out. With Ohio State, I think that Kentucky win, similar kind of feeling has been generated. But now they head back into conference play, and it's a whole other deal. And I think you're right. Within the next couple of weeks, we're going to start finally getting some at least closer to real answers about a lot of teams. And Ohio State certainly is among them, where you're just not sure yet. Are they a team that potentially could be in the upper tier of the league? Yeah, you can't rule that out, but I don't feel that's, an automatic by any means either. We're going to start to find out.
Yeah. Well, and just you're obviously schedule dependent. There's so many teams in the Big Ten now, so it takes a long time to cycle through everyone. It takes a while
Yep,
to figure out where everyone lies. That win against
100%.
Nebraska, you're like, wow, it's great. 37. I mean, winning a Big Ten game by that much at home is still an accomplishment. And they went out and beat Indiana at home. But you may look at that win differently in a couple weeks, either better or worse, but depending on how Nebraska starts playing and
Well, you make
those
you
sorts
make
of
a
things.
you make a really good point when you say with the way the schedule functions now, it's going to take a while to really cycle through. And that's absolutely right, because you're only playing 3 teams home and home.
Right.
And the other part of that, of course, is, so for Michigan State, for example, if Michigan State were to lose this game, yeah, you don't want to lose any game, but it's a road game.
Yeah.
You know, depending upon how it actually flows, you might not feel horrible about it, or you might feel pretty bad about it. You don't know. But in either case, how have you really learned a whole hell of a lot about which team is definitively better than the other? I would argue that's tough to say with any precision, because, and it's why, and I say this fully believing that it still matters, trying to win a regular season conference title. That's still a hell of an accomplishment. But
Uh-huh.
the reality, if you're looking at this in a clear-headed way, there's no way, with a schedule the way that it is, that you can say the team that finishes first is clear-cut the best team in the league. I guess I want to amend that.
Yeah, if you go
It's
18-0 or
it's
18-2 or something,
very
maybe. Yeah.
it's very unlikely
Yes.
that you
I
can
agree.
say that. And I think most years, 7, 8 years out of 10, that's going to be the case. So you're right. It's going to take, when we say the next couple of weeks, yeah, we'll start to have some answers, but I don't think we're going to have a firm grip on who's who until we're into February.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm trying to think how long it's going to take before Michigan State has played everyone, but it's going to be almost the entire. I guess it'd be probably the entire season, pretty much, because you're going to cycle through some teams twice before you play others. I don't know.
Well, again, you only play 3 teams twice.
Right? Yeah. So you almost
that
have to go
means
through February to play everybody.
14 teams you're in single plays, and then again, you think about it. Purdue, for example, just to use one obvious example, if you play Purdue on the road, so in West Lafayette, you're getting a very different read, in my opinion, as contrasted with if Purdue is coming into your gym.
Yeah.
This year's Purdue team, So when you play Purdue, and Michigan State, I believe, hosts them, which I'm grateful for. But is that gonna convince everyone at that point? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, but I that sounds negative in a sense, but I don't mean it to be. I just think it's reality. But the part that you can kind of take seriously is that obviously the more games against other competitive teams that you're playing, the closer you are to starting to get an answer as to what your team really is. And that's going to be true for both Michigan State and Ohio State in this game. It's been a little while for both. It'll have been just about a month or so in Michigan State's case, a little less for Ohio State, since they've seen a high major team. I mean, Michigan State's last game against a high major opponent was Nebraska. That's close to a month ago. It was early December, right? And then you had those 3 games over a very long period of time. Ohio State did get that Kentucky game a little more recently, but it'll be important for both of them to get back in the swing of things against other, similarly placed programs to their own and start finding out, okay, where are we strong? Where are we weaker? How do we address that? That's where we're at now, from now till the end of the season.
I think it's fair. The things you probably can say fairly is that there's not a super team in the Big Ten. There's not a team that like a Purdue last year, or
it doesn't look like it.
Auburn this year in the SEC, right? Like you're like, this is a team that's going to be, going to steamroll most teams. And then you probably can get some sort of general comparison on conferences. And I think it's kind of where people thought SEC, Big 12 are really good. Big 10's probably just a small step behind.
I'm gonna argue the Big 10 is actually the second best league, pretty easily. Big 12's not where it's been.
Yeah, because I guess Kansas has looked kind of weak. Then that's the one you usually expect the standard bearer for the team. Yeah,
they're good. There are plenty of good teams in that league, but I'm not sure who's a great one in that conference. Iowa State. I don't know that I believe that. It really is. The SEC is heads and shoulders above everybody else. Yeah. But I think you make a pretty good argument. The Big 10 would be next. Then you're probably talking about the Big 12, then the Big East, and the ACC is just awful. Just awful. It is hard to believe, but the last time I checked, which was maybe a few days ago, I believe the ACC has 5 schools that are sub 100 in KenPom overall ratings. That is almost unfathomable. But it's absolutely a function of the additions that they've been making for reasons that have nothing to do with basketball have completely shattered the ACC's. It's partially that, and then it's also, if you look at some of the schools in that conference that historically have been powerhouses, Louisville, Syracuse, that have really been going through it in a way that neither school has for decades. That has not helped either. So consequently, you've got a league that, it's Duke, and then maybe North Carolina's okay, and then that's kind of it. Yeah. Then you're down to like Clemson and Pitt and these teams that might sneak into the tournament, but they're not going to do a lot of damage, you wouldn't think.
Sure. Well, someone's got to win these games too, right? At some point, like as long as you say ratings
But
wherever. But yeah,
but in a league where 5 teams are sub 100, how much are those wins going to help you?
well, that's
Maybe
true.
you get in, but it sure as hell isn't going to help your seeding. So anyway,
Yeah.
but I think going back to what really matters here, the Big Ten. I think your analysis is right. I would agree that at least as of right now, there is not a team in the Big Ten that you look at as anything close to where Purdue's been the last couple of years. There's not a team that you think is a really great bet to be a Final Four participant at this point.
Hmm.
I do think there are teams that could get there by March, though. And so that's what I'm certainly not in doom and gloom mode by any means with
Right.
regard to the Big Ten. I do think there are teams when I look at honestly, I think Michigan State is in that category right now where I could imagine development over the next couple of months, putting them into that kind of conversation. Not into the super team conversation, but in that's a team that's a threat to win a regional. Yeah, I could
Hmm.
see it.
Yeah.
I could say the same about Illinois. I could say the same about UCLA. Um, there's Oregon.
Hmm.
Maybe if you squint hard enough, Purdue,
Yeah.
Illinois. I mean, they're Michigan. There are
Michigan. Yeah.
several, and honestly, Maryland, and I can't yet feel comfortable entirely ruling out this Ohio State team. Although I think they face some challenges, as we're going to talk about. For as good as they are in many respects, there's some challenges they face that I don't know how fixable they are.
Yeah.
But we'll
Well, I mean,
talk about that.
let's talk about it now. So on offense, Ohio State is very good. They sit at 25th overall, in and so they've been very good offensively. They do two things really well offensively. They shoot the ball really well, and they value the ball. They don't turn it over. So they're 14th nationally from three, much better than
Yeah,
Michigan State. They're 49th from two, and 35th in turnover percentage. So again,
yeah,
they value the ball. They get the shots. They don't give them away. They get to the foul line quite a bit. They're 79th in free throw attempts. By comparison, Michigan State is, strangely 56th in the country. They don't shoot as well there. They're a little under 70% as a team, whereas Michigan State's shooting over 80%. And their offensive weakness is rebounding. So they're 254th on the offensive glass. And defense is kind of where they've actually had problems even in the past few years under Chris Holtman. They're a little better there, but they're 38th after some bad finishes in the last couple of years. But again, they have trouble on the boards. They're 145th in defensive rebounding. They foul very often. They're 291st in fouling, but they're very good against preventing successful shots. So they're 17th against threes. They're 29th against twos, and they've been unlucky. Their free throw defense is not good. So they're giving up almost 80% from the line
yeah.
against teams, which is I think where Michigan State was at the beginning of the season. They had a bad free throw percentage too. The only other thing to mention is that they play slow. Their tempo is 159th. They're 202nd in average length of offensive possession. So kind of a slowish team, but very efficient offensively and very good defensively as well. But just can't rebound well.
Yeah, and rebounding is a big problem, and I'll get to that in a second. But offensively, the profile with this team is very simple, and it's a good one to have. They're going to make shots that they get, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to get a good amount of them because they're not going to kick the ball away. Now, they don't get second shots, but they're not going to turn it over. So if you're a team that either one, if you can have both, that's ideal. Where
Yeah.
you offensive rebound well and you also don't turn it over. But there honestly not a lot of teams do that. Usually it's one or the other. So for Ohio State, it's a good profile to have because they know they're going to get a good amount of opportunities to score because of the way they play, because they don't turn it over. And
Mm-hmm.
then when they get opportunities to score, from the field at least, they're hitting shots. No second chances, as we said. The other issue, and it's not a terrible one yet, but man, in the Big Ten, where you expect you're going to be in a lot of tight games, one thing to watch, and it starts with this game, is the free throw line. They've done a
Mm-hmm.
very good job getting there, but they're not hitting as well as they'd like to. They're sub 70% in conference games where you figure you're a lot of the time you might be in a 1 possession, 2 possession game. That'll
Yeah.
frequently happen. Boy, a couple free throws here or there make a huge difference. And
Sure.
right now, if Ohio State was shooting, say, in the mid 70s from the line, they'd feel great about their offense. And they should still feel pretty good about it. But that's one thing. The frequency of getting there is A-OK. They're fine in regards to that. But the efficiency when they get those opportunities, not really good enough. And that could end up being something offensively that comes back to bite them. Defensively, it's really interesting. The two things you would say are the best bellwethers of what kind of defensive team you're going to be is how well you limit opponent's success from 3 and from 2. And
Yeah.
they've been great. They've been great. Both of those areas. But the reason they're only a good defensive team and not a great one thus far is it's the other areas where they get hurt. They're not a good defensive rebounding team. They're better on that end than they are offensively, but they're still not good. They're right in the middle of the pack nationally, which if you're playing in a league like the Big Ten, that's a problem. So they don't cut possessions off as well as they should when they generate a miss. And then the other thing is, as you mentioned, teams are shooting they're almost shooting 78% at the line, which is crazy. It's one of the 20 worst numbers in the country. Well, they've got no control over that.
Yeah, of
But
course.
what they do have control over is how often they're putting teams there. And that's been a problem. So they are having problems fouling people. Again, in in conference games where the margins can be really fine, that's a problem. When you are not getting it done as well as you should on the offensive end at the line, and on the other end, you've got a real problem keeping opponents from getting there. That's a recipe to lose close games.
Sure.
So that's how I see it with them. There are a lot of things. The things that generally lead to sustained success, they do well in a lot of those areas. But there are just enough of these weaknesses that you do have to wonder. I would say this also about the rebounding. It's not always the case. We saw this with Western Michigan, an outstanding rebounding team that's not particularly big, but they're still good. Ohio State does not play a ton of size. Now, having Aaron Bradshaw back, who's a 7-footer, is a big deal. That helps. But this is not a big team. And frequently, to date this season, Ohio State has run smaller teams out there. But again, that's not a guarantee that you're bad. When Penn State had that extremely small team a couple of years ago, that team actually rebounded very well because those guys had the right kind of mentality for it. Ohio State is smaller and plays smaller. And so I don't know how fixable I believe that is. I think having Bradshaw back helps, but he's also not a great rebounder. If you're looking for a comparison point for him, there's a lot of elements with him that are reminiscent of Xavier Booker. So, that would be like if we were saying, well, Xavier Booker is going to be the difference maker for us as a rebounding group. You would say, well, on the right night he could, but that right night isn't going to come around every night. And so I don't know if Bradshaw totally or even mostly solves that. I still think they're going to be vulnerable there for much of the year. And again, in the Big Ten, we know this year in, year out, you are going to play teams that rebound the ball very well. It is a staple in this conference. And if you can't do the job in that area of the game, you really put pressure on all the other areas to make up for it. And I kind of feel that's maybe why I would be hesitant to say, yeah, Ohio State's figured things out and they're going to finish in the upper echelon of the league.
Right.
We'll see. But that's one part that would worry me. And again, the free throw line both ways is the other.
All right. Well, let's move on and start talking about the lineup for Ohio State, brought to you by the brothers at Just Two Gutters. And so, hey, those brothers, they just do gutters. That means they specialize only in gutters. They don't do a bunch of other stuff. They're not going to come to your house and try and replace your windows or get you a new roof. They just work in gutters. They clean them out. They put leaf guards on. They'll even come out in weather like this. I don't know what it's like in yours end of the side of the state, but we had a nice little snowfall today, so it looks Christmassy, even though it's now the new year. They fix your downspouts. If it's a section of gutter, it's a whole gutters, or replace them, do whatever needs to be done. They fix the gutters in my wife's office, like I've mentioned many times before. Did a fantastic job there as well. So it doesn't have to be your house; it can be your business. Basically, wherever you got gutters, those guys can figure it out and fix them for you. So check them out. They're on the east and the west side of the state of Michigan. You can find ways to connect with them on our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. There you can get links for either Kurt or Greg, depending where you live. You get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate, and they sponsor the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. And we'll start going through the starters, and then Ron will give us the player, although I have a hunch who it is. We'll begin with Bruce Thornton. He's the 6'2", 215-pound junior point guard who I know you were really high on even as a freshman. He really started coming out at the end of the season, and he's not disappointed. He's averaging 17.4 points a game, 56, 49, 83 shooting, 5 assists per game, and only 17 turnovers in 13 games. So he is really efficient. Also averages 6 free throw attempts a game. And I don't know. I mean, he's why their offense is so good. I think is probably a way to say it.
I listened to Tom Izzo's presser today, and he made a reference. He kind of caught himself because at first he referenced Thornton as a superstar, and then he said star. And I get that. I don't know whether I'm a big fan of his. I don't know whether I'm ready to call him a superstar because to me, that's reserved in the college game. That's reserved for guys that are all Americans, are contenders for, or if not winners of conference player of the year awards, that type of thing.
Right.
And I don't know yet where Bruce Thornton's going to sit in that kind of discussion, but I will tell you this. And look, Braden Smith at Purdue has had a nice season individually, no question. And he's done some things very, very well. But I'm just talking about me. If I had to pick one guy to start my team at the point in this conference, it's Bruce Thornton.
Yeah.
I am high on him. I've been high on him. He's done, I think, nothing to make me think that I was off the mark in terms of assessing him. He's a very, very difficult player to deal with because you start with the physical package. And Izzo talked about this. He talked about how, Jeremy Fears is going to have a challenge here because physically he's not put together the way Thornton is. And you think about that. Most games, we feel pretty good about how Jeremy Fears will stack up in terms of, strength, those kinds of things. Most games he plays in, we feel pretty good about that. This is one where he doesn't have an advantage. Thornton does. Thornton has been physically, he reminds me probably as much Mateen Cleaves as anybody else who's played that position in this league. He's put together in a similar way where you look at him and you think, God, that guy could be a linebacker or a fullback, but he's a point guard. So you start with that. That makes him, you mentioned, he averages 6 free throw attempts per game. I think one area he's gotten a lot better at over the course of his college career is being aggressive, picking his spots, and making himself enough of a threat that he's able to draw attention, draw fouls, and get himself to the line. And he's been very, very effective in that way this year. But then you add to it, the guy is shooting almost 50% from
that's
three.
Not Mateen Cleaves like.
No, he's, 56, 49, 83 is a hell of a shooting line, And then you top it all off with the fact that he's a great playmaker. He's not an incredible playmaker in the sense that I don't compare him to someone like Jeremy Fears, for example. I think Jeremy Fears is actually a better creator than Thornton is, but Thornton is good and he doesn't make mistakes, and that's good enough. You don't have to be Irvin Johnson to be good enough running your team if you make the right plays and you don't make many mistakes. And that absolutely fits Thornton to a T. And then, he's pretty good defensively. So it's a total package. I mean, I think he's one of the best players in this league, regardless of position, and he's the engine. He's where it all starts for Ohio State, no doubt about that.
We'll talk about the next guard is John Mobley Jr., 6'1" freshman. He's now in the starting lineup out with Michi Johnson, we mentioned earlier, who's no longer with the team. He's having a very nice season as a true freshman. He was a high school teammate with Jace Richardson for a year, I guess, out in Vegas, at Bishop Gorman. He's averaging 12.2 points a game on 44, 48, and 49 shooting. It's a lot of 89 shooting.
Yeah, big time shooter, and he's been great and consistently great this season as a freshman. I remember seeing him. The game I remember seeing actually was one that Jace was hurt for Bishop Gorman. But I watched anyway, and John Mobley put on a show. He's a native of Ohio, went out to play his high school basketball at Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. But he's come home for college, and boy, he's been an important addition for them. I mean, especially with Michi Johnson leaving, or whatever his status is, but not playing for them right now, it's kind of critical that they had someone having the kind of year that Mobley's had to just slot right in there. And he was already playing a lot anyway, but just play some additional minutes. That's a really, really big deal. And, we're all very impressed by the freshman season that Jace Richardson has had, and rightly so. And I think Jace is a little more well-rounded than Mobley, but man, you can't criticize what Mobley's done either. He's up there among the better freshman guards nationally, and is a guy who doesn't get talked about very much.
Now, I don't know if you know the answers, but we've talked in the past about the fact that the Michigan high school ranks have sort of been hollowed out. People leaving, going play for, LaLu or other, academies. Is that an Ohio thing too? Is that why he
Absolutely.
it's like a Midwest thing, maybe even?
I would say
maybe not Indiana, but
the only state that maybe avoids it a little more is Indiana, but in part, some of those Indiana kids end up at a place like LaLu, so they're not necessarily playing Indiana high school basketball. They just happen to be playing for a prep school in Indiana.
I got you.
Okay. But yeah, absolutely, it affects Ohio, no question.
All right, so then we'll talk about Devin Royal, a guy who Michigan State was going after. He's a 6'6", 230-pound sophomore, and he showed signs at the end of last year, really kind of figuring things out. And he's definitely showing it this year. He's averaging almost 15 points a game, which puts him second on the team, averaging 7.5 rebounds a game, shooting 60, 20, and 73. He had a 31 and 10 game early this year against Valpo. Obviously, the 20 is the thing that is holding him back right now, not being able to hit from deep, but he's kind of doing everything else.
Yeah, he's really found his game. I mean, last year, fans probably remember, he was the guy that originally it looked like might fill one of that third slot after Fears and Booker committed, and MSU went at him very hard. He ended up choosing Ohio State, and then Michigan State pivoted to Cohen Carr, and I think they're very happy about that right now. But Devin got off to a very slow start last season, but late in the year when Ohio State improved, once Diebler took over, he started to show signs and found himself a little bit, and he's just picked right up where he left off heading into this year and has been really, really good. I watched some of that Valpo game, and they just, it's Valpo, so you don't take it to mean too much, but he was really, really good, really good. And I think, he leads them in rebounding. He's second in scoring. That's a good place to start. The one fly in the ointment is what you mentioned, that he has not been able to dial in the deep shot. And if that comes, he's a very different player than Cohen Carr, but I would say that in a broader sense, the equation is similar for both guys, in that if either one or both of them can gain some level of consistency, they don't even have to be 40% plus guys, just enough that they're a threat that forces opponents to deal with them on the perimeter. Mm-hmm. They're going to become even that much better, because then it's going to open up even more for them going to the rim, finishing inside. You know, as I say, they're different players. Devin Royal is not nearly the athlete that Cohen Carr is, but he's a very, very good player. He reminds me somewhat of guys like, and this isn't a perfect comparison, but a guy like a Raymar Morgan, the way he was, where he could play the 3, played the 4, has versatility, but maybe not quite as good on the perimeter as you'd like. But is really more of an inside the arc guy offensively. Tough, strong rebounder, has some versatility defensively. All those things apply to Devin Royal. So he's arrived as a sophomore and has become a very, very good player, which is not a surprise because he was ranked that way. And there were a lot of schools, including Michigan State, that saw it and thought this is what was going to happen.
Well, then we'll go to the guy playing the 3, or is he playing the 4 or the 5? No, that's Evan Mahaffey, 6'6", 220-pound junior, averaging 5.2 points a game, 3.7 rebounds a game, and shooting 71% from the floor, only 38% from the line, leads the team in blocks at 16. And people may remember that he originally was playing at Penn State.
Yeah, and he's now in his 3rd year of Big Ten basketball, and he's playing essentially exactly the same role he always has. Mahaffey's a guy, and I remember saying this last year when he transferred into Ohio State, and it looked like it didn't make a lot of sense initially because Ohio State seemed like they were deep enough that you might find some difficulty envisioning a path for him to consistent minutes. Yet, when the season unfolded, there he was, just like at Penn State. It kind of looked that way, and yet Evan Mahaffey was firmly in the mix and became a starter. He is an ultimate example of a glue guy. He doesn't do anything. The shooting percentage is exceptional, but that's because he really doesn't take anything except dunks and layups. That's pretty much all he shoots. So that's why he's able to shoot 70%. But that's smart because he plays within himself. He doesn't do anything exceptionally well, but he does enough things at a good enough level that he ends up being a guy his coaches rely on. And he always plays hard, does some things defensively. He's versatile defensively, and he brings energy. So those are things that any team can use. And in Ohio State's case, they fiddled around, again, due partially to player absence and somewhat to players maybe not being quite as efficient as they'd like. They fiddled around over the course of the year with the starting lineup, but for the moment at least, they seem to have settled on the one I've laid out. And Mahaffey's in there because he makes winning plays. He's not going to put up big numbers, but he just does the kind of things that help you win games.
And finally, we have Sean Stewart, 6'9", 220-pound sophomore, transferred from Duke. So he has to be great, right? He had to fill in for when Bradshaw left, and he's got a little bit more of a 4 game, averaging under 6 points a game and 6 rebounds a game in about 18 minutes, and shoots 50% from the floor and the free throw line.
Yeah. McDonald's All-American, so highly regarded player.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Kind of struggled to find, he played, but he struggled to find, a big consistent role at Duke, transferred to Ohio State, and their vision was that he would be the starting 4-man and Bradshaw would be the 5. Well, that would be fine. Bradshaw hasn't been available all the time, so Stewart's ended up playing a lot more 5 than I think anyone envisioned. And he's on 6'9", 220. He's undersized for that position.
Yeah.
Definitely in the Big Ten. With what the Big Ten's going to roll out, now this is one of those things I was talking about earlier. I'm not sure what they can do to fix that. Stewart's, he's not tiny, but he's not, I'll take it to Michigan State for a second.
Yes, it's like Kohler playing the 5.
Exactly.
Right,
I've spent enough time talking about that this year that when you see Jackson playing real 5s, like 6'11", 7-foot guys who outweigh him, you see him get swallowed up some. And it feels to me like that's kind of the way it is with Stewart, with the added issue that unlike Jackson, who in those circumstances at least can still rebound with those guys, Stewart really can't do that. So it's not even just defensively. So, I don't mean to run him down completely. I think Stewart can be part of a successful team, but he'd be a lot better off if they were able to play him at a more natural spot. But then the problem there is Devin Royals really playing well as an
Yeah.
undersized four-man. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, these are the challenges you have in college basketball too, right? I mean that, or
Mm-hmm.
any process construction, they're trade-offs for everything. So, well, let's go
Yep.
to the reserves and talk about Bradshaw, who you just mentioned. Aaron Bradshaw, 7-footer, 220 pounds, sophomore
Are we
transfer.
gonna? Are we supposed to do the?
Oh yeah, we should probably would player
Yeah,
because I assume the player
yeah.
best to keep in the gutter is a starter. I'm
Yeah.
gonna guess it's Thornton, but I'll let you tell me who it is.
It's Thornton. Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, you hope it's usually obvious, but there's some teams where like, yeah, there are about 2 or 3 players could be. So yeah,
Yeah.
Bruce Thornton's a player needs to be kept in the gutter. Brought to you by the Brothers Suggest You Gutters. But we'll go through the rest of the reserves. Talking about Aaron Bradshaw, the 7-footer, 220-pound transfer from Kentucky sophomore. He just returned to the lineup, as you mentioned before. He was out for a little while. He's averaging 9.2 points a game, 4 rebounds a game in about 22 minutes, shooting 48, 21, and 67. And so it's, I guess, not too surprising, those numbers.
Aaron Bradshaw, I really do think that Booker is a very good comparison point. They were both McDonald's All-Americans, and they were both McDonald's All-Americans because they combined real serious length. Bradshaw's an inch taller than Book. He's legit 7 feet with crazy athleticism for the position and hints of a skill set of ball skills that would enable them to be versatile. I think Book has a little more in that way than Bradshaw, but it's similar. And they also had similar criticisms of their games, which would be primarily needed to add strength and inconsistent motors.
Yeah.
So Bradshaw played at Kentucky, and because of those negatives, he had a year. It wasn't exactly the same as Books, but somewhat similar in certain respects, in that he wasn't able to produce, let's say, at the level that I think people would normally expect from a guy who was rated where he
Yeah.
was.
Right.
And so he transferred to Ohio State, and Ohio State really, it was obvious, needed him to be effective right away because they lost Felix Okpara, who transferred to Tennessee. They lost Zed Key, who transferred to Dayton.
Mm-hmm.
So both of their centers were gone. They really needed Bradshaw to be effective. And I think he's been okay when he's played. The problem has been there was that chunk there where he wasn't playing. So that
Mm-hmm.
had to be disruptive. I think at his best, Bradshaw's what they need because he gives them that length, which means he also gives them some rim protection. He averages a bit over a block a game. So he's able to do some of that. He should be able to give them some rebounding help. I don't know how much. And again, a guy who can be an effective scorer around the rim potentially. So there's loads of potential with him. It's, as I say, I think Ohio State
Yeah.
fans, I have to believe, feel very similarly about him to the way MSU fans feel about Xavier Booker, where you look at the total package and you say, there's there's a star in there somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
are you going to be able to get it out of him?
Of course,
You
the
know,
difference is they've only had to watch that for a year, whereas Michigan State would watch Booker for 2 years, just waiting
there,
for right.
there's
I mean,
that, but there's also too the other thing I would say is that in my opinion, the way these two teams have evolved, I think it's a little more important for Bradshaw to come through for Ohio State than it is for Booker to find consistent high level play for Michigan State.
yeah, for Ohio State to get to where they want to go. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because Michigan State got Zapala, who's
Mm-hmm.
been very good.
Yeah.
They have Carson Cooper, who has been somewhat inconsistent, but is certainly capable of helping them in the areas that they need help in. And then, of course, they've had Jackson Kohler, and you can also throw Cohen Carr's development in there because he can play the four if
Right.
you need him to. So, to me, this gets back to again what I've said before: how much can Ohio State really fix? Potentially in terms of the negative issues they have, and I question how much they can do. But I will say this: Aaron Bradshaw suddenly finding another gear and staying there would go a long way toward helping that.
Sure. All right, next will be Micah Parrish, who, again, fans here might recognize the name. 6'6", 230-pound transfer from San Diego State. He started at Oakland. Michigan State was in the mix trying to get him to play the four the previous year. But he obviously ended up as an Aztec. Now he's at Ohio State. He is averaging a little under 10 points a game, 4.7 rebounds a game in about 28 minutes. So he plays a lot, and he's shooting 42, 32, and 74.
Yeah, an important addition because it gave them an ability to lengthen their bench. I don't think they knew before the season that Devin Royal was going to find another
Sure.
gear.
Right.
I think they hoped for that, but they didn't
Mhm.
know that. So adding
Right.
somebody like Micah Parrish was really important because you know what you're getting with him. He's a veteran. He's a fifth-year COVID guy. He produced at Oakland. He produced at San Diego State. So he's been to a Final Four. He checks a lot of boxes. And I think he's more or less played the way they expected him to. He'd probably hoped that he'd shoot a little better from three, but he's been okay.
Yeah.
He's not a star, but he does a number of things. He's kind of like a more productive version of a Mahaffey in a way, in that Micah Parrish does a number of things that will help you win games. So he checks a lot of boxes in a lot of areas without being a dominant player in any of them.
Yeah. Then we have Case Glover, 6 foot senior transfer from Kansas State. He didn't play due to injury there, but he also played at Florida and Samford. So he's been around, as they say, averaging 7 points a game on 56, 56, and 50 shooting. That's kind of strange. Your free throw percentage is lower than your field goal and 3-point shooting.
Yeah, it's on very low volume because he hasn't yet played a lot because he was injured. Very important that he's come back and been productive with what's happened with Michi Johnson, though, because it gives them another guard, gives them a little bit of depth in that backcourt, which is important. Glover's an interesting case. As you said, he was at Kansas State last year and he didn't play at all due to injury, and then he was injured at the start of this year at Ohio State. But if you go back to the couple of years he played at Samford, he was one of the more productive mid-major guards in the country. He was really good for them offensively. So the fact that he's off to a good start shooting, even though it's admittedly we're talking about low volume at this stage, that's not shocking, and it's really important for Ohio State that they've got him, because it gives them that extra body in that group so they can get guys like Thornton and Mobley a little bit of rest and keep those guys fresh.
Then we have Colin White, 6'6" freshman, averaging 3 points a game and 1.6 rebounds a game, shooting 50, 40, and 50, and obviously limited volume.
Yeah, and he's only recently kind of got himself into the playing group. I don't know that I'm convinced that MSU will see. Well, I'm not. Yeah, and I'm not convinced that MSU will see him, but they liked him. He's a freshman this year, true freshman. They like him. They like his future as a guy who can be a perimeter scorer and yet has some good size for the wing. But yeah, we'll see if we see him.
And finally, we have Austin Parks. Didn't play in the last game, but he's a 6'10" to 250-pound sophomore. So, if you need size, he's probably a good guy to bring in. He's averaging 1.7 points a game and 1.1 rebounds a game in about 10 minutes, shooting 54% from the field and 43% from the line.
Yeah, they were forced into playing him, I think, even a little more than they would have wanted to in the absence of Bradshaw, because at least Parks had real five-man size. But he hasn't yet kind of found it in terms of his development to be a guy who's ready to play a consistent, significant rotation role for them. Not particularly athletic for the position. He does have real size, which helps, but unclear. I couldn't find any information as to why he sat out their game against Indiana State, whether it's injury related or just one of those things. I tend to think it was injury related or illness related, because they won that game easily and they played a lot of people and he didn't play. So we'll see if he sees the floor against Michigan State, but if he does, I think it'll be in a limited way.
It's certainly illness season. with without
Yeah.
a doubt at this time of year, especially college kids. And we didn't even talk about it in the last show because it was so abbreviated. And I don't think we knew at the time, but
We didn't know
Jackson
about
Kohler
Jackson
was,
Kohler.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was sick, and so that may have that we'll chalk that up to an illness game and hopefully bounce back from that. But
100%. It explained a lot. It explained why he was struggling to finish the way that he was.
and why he didn't
At
play as
least
many minutes either,
and
too,
why
for
right,
sure.
and
Yeah.
why he didn't see the minutes. I think our assumption was, well, he just wasn't very productive, and if you're not productive, you're going to see your minutes
Hmm.
shrink on this team. But I think there was a reason he wasn't productive.
Right, exactly. So that brings us to the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, if you have windows in your house, which most people do, if you have a major business, maybe you're high rise, maybe you've got an apartment building, and you need those windows cleaned from time to time, make sure you call the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They should be your first line of attack. They'll come out. They can power wash your house. They'll certainly clean the windows. They get the inside, the outside, the screens, the windowsills, everything super efficient and very, 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 very friendly. They'll give you great pricing. 15% or sorry, 15% off if you get your estimate and mention Final Four when you get it. You can head on over to our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. So check out the Squeegee Squad at Grand Rapids. They're going to clean your glass and they'll take care of your house or wherever your business, whatever it is. And so they sponsor the segment, Who Cleans the Glass Best? And right now I'm cleaning the glass best, which is kind of surprising. I'm up 5-4 right now. And we have our new format. So I get to pick first. And I think for Michigan State, I would think you're foolish not to take Jackson Kohler, even though he had an off game. I assume by now he's gotten over whatever cold he had. So I'm going to go with Kohler as my first pick in on our snake
Yeah.
draft.
And I will take Zapala and Cohen Carr. I'm
Yeah,
going to bet so Cohen Carr is the wild card there, as opposed to say Carson Cooper, who might seem like the safer bet. But I think this is a game. The way Cohen's been playing is part of the reason for that. It's what's been
sure.
encouraging that he seems to be starting to find another gear that's keeping him on the floor. And I also think this is a game that I can imagine Michigan State feeling compelled to match up, say, with Devin Royal, and they might feel that there are
Hmm.
segments where Cohen's a better answer than Jackson or Booker.
Yeah, so that leads me to the fourth pick, and the third and fourth picks I think are really tricky. Because I can imagine it's time for Booker to kind of get back in. I also think at some point Fiddler is going to get in here, and I don't know when that game is going to be, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think he's going to arrive at some point. I think I'll just go with Cooper just because it seems like a game where he's going to
Yeah.
be playing a little bit with his size, and I think potential for foul trouble. So I don't
Well,
know.
what you hope for, actually, if you're Michigan State, is that this is a game where you are able to. And we're going to turn to this again in a second, where you're able to really take advantage of your strength against Ohio State inside,
Yeah,
and
right.
that could and as long as your big men can hang in there defensively, and that doesn't pose a bigger problem. Cooper's not a bad pick, even as the third big out of 4 selections. I could see it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this far in advance, it's really hard to. You can envision all sorts of different things, and so that's definitely one that's very reasonable. All right. So let's talk about nudge printing. Nudge printing supplies all the apparel like I'm wearing right now, the super comfortable hoodies. If you have Spartan stuff that you want to get, the first place you should go is Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. They have those cool quarter zips. I know people were on the mag board talking about those with it's like Sparty dribbling basketball. They've got those. They've got hats. They've got t-shirts, obviously, and pretty much anything you can think of. Jackets. I've got my daughter. They've got really cool hats now. So check out Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You can get Michigan State stuff. You can get other schools as well, including Indiana, Iowa, most of the schools in the state of Michigan, outside the University of Michigan, the directional schools. So you can get your stuff there. If maybe get it for a friend or cousin, spouse, whomever. You guys can get both your stuff, and it's super quick shipping, and also it's Michigan based, so you're supporting a business right here in Michigan with all the licensing that you usually for the big stores get. So it's kind of nice you have Gabe and Brittany, who are Spartan alums, who take care of that for us. So I highly recommend Nudge Printing. 20% off if you type in Final Four just as one word in checkout for listeners of the show. All right, so the first key to the game is transition game. So obviously, I mentioned before, Ohio State plays slow. We know Michigan State likes to play fast. It's not only in the half court, but also just getting out fast break as much as possible, off rebounds and even off made baskets. So they've done a pretty good job this year in transition, and I think they just need to kind of continue that and hopefully get a few easy baskets on the road, which is always harder.
Yeah, this way, we normally talk about MSU just needing to play fast in a holistic way,
Yeah,
which means a half court too. Here, I'm a little more focused on the transition game, and the reason I say that is Ohio State, as we talked about, has done a hell of a job guarding against twos and threes
right.
from the floor. So they're having success in preventing opponent makes when you're running normal half court offense. So I think for Michigan State, this is one where you really want to see as many of those easy opportunities as you can get. And it'll be a test because you're playing a team and a program that knows what you do. MSU didn't have any problem keeping the running game going against Minnesota and Nebraska in the first two league games.
Mm-hmm.
But, Ohio State, I would suggest, is a little bit of a different matter. And, they may be more successful than, say, Minnesota was in terms of being able to control tempo. But in addition to that, in making sure that their floor balance is straight and that they're getting back. For Michigan State, I think you really want to see them pushing consistently. And it should be there because even though I don't think they're likely to get a ton of those pick six type turnovers, but I do think that they should be able to at least get a lot of clean defensive rebounds.
Right.
So we'll see if
we've seen
they're
them run
able.
off those very,
Yep.
I mean, that's,
Yep.
we saw a lot.
We'll
yeah.
see if that's enough to get them into transition.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because you usually think of a transition only off a steal or some sort of turnover, but there are plenty of opportunities in transition off a longer rebound or.
Well, off makes too. We know they'll do it off Ohio
right.
State makes, but in particular, I think the rebounding issue, if you're able to consistently get clean rebounds and you're not having to fight to end a possession at one shot, that can help. And I think that's likely to be the equation in this game.
Well, speaking of rebounds, the second key to the game is the boards. And I was just looking up too, because, we talked about how the rebounding is the one place weakness, I suppose you'd say, for Ohio State. And the three of their four losses, they were giving up 37% plus on the defensive boards.
There you go.
And so not surprising. I mean, I think Auburn is like 42%, which is bad because they're a really good shooting team too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which explains how you lose by 40.
Exactly.
To Auburn.
You're just not stopping anybody. Yeah, I will say I also looked up in this 3-game win streak they've had. They've held those opponents, including Kentucky, to collectively nobody's exceeded 32%.
Mm-hmm.
So the defensive rebounding's been a little bit better. That's where they're okay. They're mediocre in that area. They're a bad offensive rebounding team. But if you're Michigan State, I think, and especially coming off that Western performance where, you don't feel good about what happened on the glass. Western statistically very good, but that doesn't matter. If you're Michigan State, that's one you would hope you'd rise to the occasion, and they didn't. And so no better time than present to get back on the beam and take advantage of a team that statistically and also in terms of the look test, you feel like you should be able to carve out an advantage. Against.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the third key to the game, turnovers. This is something that in the beginning of the season, Michigan State was fantastic. And as the season's gone, they've gotten sloppier and sloppier, I guess you'd say. Whereas now it's kind of like, they went 16, 17 turnovers in the last game against Western Michigan, and they were mostly unforced. It was kind of chalked up to sort of low energy game where you play low energy game, you kind of do lower energy things, which is like travel when there's no one around you or get 5-second calls or kind of just look discombobulated. So anyway, that's something that, on the road, obviously you've got to be able to, if you're not making all your shots, you got to make sure you're valuing every possession.
Look, Izzo mentioned it in his press conference today. Michigan State only had 54 shots from the floor against Western, which I think he said was a season low. I didn't verify that, but if it's not, it's probably pretty close. Why did that happen? Well, they didn't do much on the offensive boards. They weren't great there. So they didn't generate a ton of second chance shots, and they turned it over way too much. And as you say, most of them unforced. That's the part
Hmm.
that's really frustrating. And so, a game like this, you figure Ohio State's not likely to commit a bunch of turnovers. You hope that if you're Michigan State, you're going to be able to carve out some kind of advantage, hopefully a meaningful one on the glass. But then if you could follow that up by the turnover game being somewhere close to even, then you're really in good position.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about, and by the way, you probably need to be, because you look at what Ohio State does shooting the ball, and you look
Yeah.
at the way they defend against opponents shooting the ball against them. You might need those few extra opportunities to come out of there with a win. It's sort of the Michigan State formula traditionally under Tom Izzo has been, if the scoring attempts are close to even, Michigan State's got a huge advantage because they're going
Right.
to shoot better and they're going to defend better against you than you do against us. And that has largely held true. I think this Ohio State team can look at it in a somewhat similar fashion.
Yeah. So that brings us to the fourth key of the game, the free throw line. So both teams we mentioned get to the line a lot. They do a very good job. Michigan State is a little bit better getting the line and certainly is better shooting at the line. And this has been a key to Michigan State having even games where they don't play great. They sort of win comfortably, like
Yeah.
against Western, because their free throw shooting is frequent enough, and also they're very efficient when they get there.
Yeah, this is another, and I talked about it at the outset. Both teams do a good job getting to the line. Michigan State's a little better, but it's not a massive gap. The gap is that Michigan State shoots about 12% better from the
Yeah.
line when they get there. That's the gap. So that could mean, an extra 2 to 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
That could be big.
Yeah.
In a game you go into expecting that it's going to be relatively close. You don't know how close, but you're not expecting a blowout either way. Those kind of gaps are meaningful. So that's another area where you hope MSU can get an edge, sort of at the margins, and that enough of those things line up that it adds up to a win.
I wonder if you drill down on who you're fouling, if that somewhat, I mean, that probably has some sort of effect on the free throw percentage against. Like if you're fouling a bunch of guards versus fouling inside in the interior.
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder if
Sure.
that's, I mean,
Yeah.
there's obviously it's mostly luck, but in some respects, if you got guys who can't defend without fouling, who are your centers, maybe you're not giving up as many
Well,
free throw times. I don't know.
you would say this. Generally speaking, most teams, big men, if you've got a big men of with any kind of offensive game at all, they tend to be the guys, or at least the primary big man, let's say, tends to be the guy who's at or near the top of your chart in terms of free throw attempts.
Right.
So most teams, that's going to be the case. I don't know in Ohio State's case, there might be something there. If it ends up that, well, the biggest problem is they just can't keep guards in front of them. And so there's a lot of reaching
Mm-hmm.
and contact when guys are going past them. And that's leading to a high percentage against, because they're putting the guys at the line who shoot it well.
Yeah.
Maybe, but absent that kind of information, I would assume that it's a combination of things, and then it can also be, well, it just so happens that and 13 games is a decent amount, but it's also still a small enough number that it could get skewed. I haven't looked at the totality of their schedule, but it could be that they've just had some bad luck. That we've just mostly played teams that actually shoot free throws pretty well.
Right. Well, yeah,
That
you
could
play
be it
Michigan
too.
State. Certainly not going to help,
But
most likely.
but then on top of everything else, when you're one of the 20 worst teams in terms of free throw percentage against you, that's telling me that it's more than those maybe semi-controllable things.
Right.
It's some misfortune, but it won't be misfortune in this game. I mean, they know coming in, hey, if you put Michigan State on the line and they get 20 some free throw attempts, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem potentially. Now the other part of this is, of course, it's a Big Ten road game. They did okay in Minneapolis. We'll see how the whistle goes in Columbus, but
Exactly.
you hope that you're able to get a fair whistle, and we'll find out because we're
Yeah.
starting to enter new, uncharted territory for this team. What kind of whistle do they get in road games in the Big Ten?
And I think, it's certainly looking back at the Western Michigan game most recently, the way they were playing is they were not getting whistles because they were not being aggressive and
Yep,
attacking. And when they switched at the end of the game, they were getting the whistles. And so, obviously they have to be attacking in order to get to the free throw line like they've
for
been
sure,
doing most of the season.
for sure.
And then finally, the fifth key to the game is guarding the arc. Obviously, it's an important thing in this game because Ohio State shoots 14th in the country from three. So they can really hurt you from there.
39.3% as a team. So they
That's
have been,
10% better than Michigan
yeah,
State.
they've been really good. Now, the upside of it is they don't shoot a ton of them. So they're somewhat like Michigan State in that regard, in that the 3-point shot is not something that Ohio State, if you were an Ohio State fan, you might feel like they need to lean on a little more than they do,
Yeah.
given the way they shoot it. But be that as it may, they don't. And so you look at that and you think, okay, it's not a huge part of what they do. It matters, but it's not a crazy part. This isn't Samford,
Right.
coming in. But the flip side of it is they've been so efficient that it doesn't really matter that much. If they only take, say, 15, 16 threes, but they're drilling, 6 of them, that's damage. So I
Yeah.
do think it's important. And it could be that if you're not careful, you could find yourself in a game where they're all of a sudden taking 25 of them.
Right. Yeah.
So it's going to be very important for Michigan State to be disciplined, to be focused on locating and closing on jump shooters. And they've got a lot of guys. You know who the threats are. You know that it's primarily Thornton and Mobley in the starting lineup. It's Glover off the bench, to some extent Parrish. It's a handful of guys. It's really like 3-4 guys, but you got to be locked in on those guys.
All right. Well, I think we'll close it there. And again, a happy new year to everyone. Hopefully you had a nice holiday season. And then as we get into 2025, we have some special things happen with these Spartans. That's our hope. And I think there's definitely reason to be optimistic. Again, check out our support page. There's all kinds of stuff there if you want to support the show. Also, the best thing you can do to help the show grow is to make sure you continue to tell your friends, other Spartan fans, anyone you know, and recommend the show to them. You can also follow us on YouTube. You can watch the show. You see my fantastic sweatshirt on TV along with all the stats and things like that I post. You can find that at the YouTube channel, which is TFFINOTS. You can also follow us on Twitter at TFFINOTS68. So again, those 5-star reviews are very helpful. Help the algorithms find other Spartans can find us. So until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go green.